Hello, friends. Welcome back to ABN's Trinity channel for another episode of Colliding Worldviews. It's such a blessing to have viewers throughout the world joining us every single week. And I know we have a lot of people tuned in today, and we've had a lot of people tuned in just the last couple of weeks and in the weeks to come. Because if you did not know, we are in the midst of a special end of the year 7-week series of Colliding Worldviews with Dr. J. Smith. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about why are there two compilations of the Qur'an. Last week, we asked what happened to the earliest 9 manuscripts of the Qur'an, or just we actually narrowed it down to 6 after that, but 9 based on the first week that we talked about. And once again, I have Dr. J. Smith with me for part 3 of this historical critique series that we're doing today. Dr. Smith, it's great to see you again. Thank you for joining us for another great episode, because I know it's going to be just that.
Thanks, good. Great to have you. Great to be back again. It's terrific because this is probably what we're going to be doing today is probably one of the more damaging or more explosive material that we've worked at so far.
And I want to encourage our viewers to look at this information and then share this information with other people, because we want to equip Christians and we also want to inform Muslims, because we are going to be talking about a lot of information today about archaeology. And there is a book where a lot of these pictures and a lot of these GPS coordinates and all that stuff have come from. If you go to thesacredcity.ca, that's thesacredcity.ca, this is Dan Gibson's website. If you click on books, you will see a pretty much brand new book that he just came out with called Early Islamic Qiblas. It is $60 on Amazon, but guess what? You can actually get the PDF download of it for just $15 from his site. This is the huge book that I'm talking about right here. As you can see, Early Islamic Qiblas, full of devastating information that, every page, as I turn through this book, every single page, I'm feeling worse and worse for the 1.6 billion Muslims throughout the world who are actually, holding to the Islamic worldview, because it does not line up with archaeology, as this book shows, and as Dr. Smith will talk about today. Dr. Smith, let's get right into today's presentation on asking the question and answering the question, why are there 4 Islamic Qiblas? Can you please explain what that is, too?
Using a PowerPoint to do just that. We're going to be presenting the slides. These are slides. You need to look at them because there's so much visual material that we have to look at today. Rather than just hear a lecture, I'm going to go through every one of these slides. But before we even get into Dan Gibson's material, we need to do an introduction as to why we're even asking this question. What's the problem? Where is the difficulty with this? So let me go ahead and go to that slide, and I'll give it back over to you, Tony, and we'll get that up and we'll go right into it.
Now, friends, again, this is devastating information. And again, you need to share this with other people. We thank you so much for taking these videos and sharing them on social media, emailing them out to people, and all of that. Just so that you know, in case we have any viewers out there who are not sure what a Qibla is, this is the direction of prayer for Muslims. So you figure if you have Muslims in the United States, you have Muslims, say, in Asia, well, where are they turning towards when they pray 5 times a day? If Sunni Muslims pray 5 times a day, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, so they are all facing towards Mecca in Saudi Arabia. So the question that we're asking today is, why are there 4 Islamic Qiblas? And we're going to take you back in history and show you archaeological evidence which points to 4 Islamic Qiblas. Dr. Smith, let's go ahead and get right into it.
All right. And let's go ahead, and what we're asking is the birth of Islam. That's really what we're talking about. What really happened? Let's go and look at what the Muslims claim. And it doesn't matter whether they're radical, nominal, or liberal. All the Muslims claim this thing. First of all, they claim that Muhammad has been the last and the greatest prophet, that the Quran is his revelation sent down only to him, and is the final and greatest revelation. Therefore, it's superior to anything that came before. Therefore, if you take those two together, Islam is the final religion based on Muhammad's life and sayings, the Sunnah, and on the Quranic teachings. Conclusion is, really, Islam is completely dependent on one book and one man, the book and the man. As I've said, we've said this many times, I'll continue to say it. It really is dependent on one book and one man. The book is the Quran, the man is Muhammad. Therefore, we need to investigate both the Quran and Muhammad to see if indeed the Muslims are correct. Now, for this day, for today, what we're going to do, we've already looked at the Quran. We did that last week. What we're going to do this week now is look at Muhammad. We're going to ask questions about him. Now, to understand who he is, we need to start with the classical account. Now, this is the account that everybody has heard. This is the only account that I've ever come across. This is the only account that people who are listening have come across. This is the classical account that every Muslim has been told, that we're taught in our schools. We're taught this in our certainly in our Bible schools, in our seminaries, our secular schools. First and foremost, that Muhammad was born in 570 A.D., that when he was roughly 40 years old, he went out to do some meditating up in the Hira cave, and there he met Jibril, or as we know him as Gabriel, who said Akra, and his response means to recite, and his response was Ma'akra. 3 times that happens. He then returns back to Medina because he cannot read what this angel wanted him to read. Tells his wife Khadija about it, and then she gives him a test, which we won't go into right now. She then goes to her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal, tells him to relate this story to him, and it is he that tells Muhammad that he is a prophet, that this is a prophetic. This is an angel that came to him to prove that he was a prophet. So from that time in 610, there, because of that meeting of Jibril and Muhammad in the cave, from that time up until 622, you get these revelations start to appear. And that's the Meccan revelations. They are the ones that are the second half of the Quran. They are the ones that revealed to him while he was living in the city of Mecca. In 621, he gets woken up in the middle of the night by the angel who says to get up on the back of the winged horse called the Burak. He flies up to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem, he goes up the 7 heavens to meet with Allah, who tells him to pray 50 times a day. Comes back to the 5th heaven, meets Moses, who says, no, that's way too many. See if you can get it down. So he bounces back and forth between the 7th and the 5th heaven and gets the prayers from 50 to 45 down to 30, down to 20, down to 10, down to 5 prayers. Once he gets it to 5 prayers, Moses says, okay, that's enough. Head on back down, and he flies on back down to Mecca. Now that happens first to Jerusalem and then on the winged horse back on to Mecca. Now that's known as the Miraj. And it's a very famous story, well known by most Muslims that I know. And that's where we get the 5 prayers. 621, it happens. In 622, the next year, then he moves from Mecca up to Medina with around 80, some say maybe as many as 200 followers. And that is known as the Hijrah, the Exodus, moving from Mecca to Medina. According to many of the accounts, we know that he was asked to come there. Some say because there was a problem between the Jews and the Ansar there in Medina. They needed help, and they needed a neutral arbiter. That's why they brought Muhammad in. He was neutral, and he did that, and he came with that intention. And for the first 2 years, from 622 to 624, it worked. He was an arbiter. He tried to bring these Jews, the Banu Qurayza, the Banu Kainuka, the Banu Nadir families together. After around 2 years, they refused to accept him as a prophet. He then rejected them, and that was then when he created the Khilafah. He no longer wanted to have a relationship with the Jews. And from 624 to 632, then we will get into that. That was when the violence began, especially against the Jewish tribes. Nonetheless, from 622 up until 632, that last 10 years of his life, he then received the Medinan revelations, which is the first half of the Quran. In 630, he comes and conquers Mecca without firing a shot. And then in 632, he dies. Some believe by poisoning. We don't really know. At that point when he died, no Quran had been written. The Quran had not been written down. Abu Bakr takes over, rules for 2 years. He dies peacefully. He writes the first, or has written, he gives the responsibility to Zayd ibn Thabit to write the Quran down, the first recension. When he dies, Umar takes over. He rules for about 10 years and is killed in 644. When he is killed, Uthman takes over from 644 to 656. It is during his reign that the second recension of the Quran that we talked about last week and we talked about the week before, the last 2 weeks, that's when that final supposed Quran was written down. He is killed in 656, and Ali then takes over for the next 5 years up until 661. Now, that is the classical account. That's all we've been told. That's all we know. That is the material that we're all dependent on. And that's the Muhammad everybody assumes is historical. But here's the problem. Take a look at that timeline, and you will see that everything I've just told you comes within that red dotted period from 570 to 632. Everything we know about who Muhammad is, how the Quran was put together, how Islam began, about his movement from Mecca to Medina, all the stories of the classical account take within that period of the red dotted line. When was this story written down? Well, you would have thought, Tony, that it would be written down in that period where the red dotted line is, wouldn't you think? Let's look at the next graph, because then you will see it is this period, it is this time period that it's written down where the next red dotted line is. But look at the dates. The first biography of Muhammad is not till 765, Ibn Ishaq. We don't have his material. That's why he's not within the red dotted line. We only get his material from Ibn Hisham. Ibn Hisham is the first to write down this account of the Prophet's life. And he dies in 833. Muhammad died in 632. 833 to 632, you're talking about roughly 200 years. So it takes them 200 years to finally write down the life of the Prophet Muhammad. His sayings, the hadith, even more prolific, they're first tabulated by al-Bukhari. Look at his dates, 870. That's 240 years after the event. The first tafsir in the Tahriq, the commentaries on the Quran and the history of mankind, are first written by Al-Tabari, who dies in 923. So that's the 10th century. So everything that happens here at this period, in that red dotted line, in the early 7th century, only gets written down in the mid to late 8th century up until, 9th century up until the 10th century. Can you see the problem? Everything we know about Muhammad historically is written by Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, al-Bukhari, al-Tabari. They are the first to write down the genres of what we know as the Sunnah of the Prophet, the life of the Prophet. But that's 200 to 300 years later. Does that bother anybody? It certainly bothers me. And that's why when you look and compare what we have for Christianity, for the person of Jesus Christ, and how Christianity was started, take a look at how Christianity was started. We know we have the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. But the 3 of them, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are written within 30 to 40 years of Christ's death. John would be the last of the Gospels to be written down. That's written 60 years after Christ's death. We know that Paul's letters were written within 15 to 20 years of Christ's death. So everything we know about how Christianity began, about Jesus Christ, who he was, what he did, where he went, what he said, is written within 15 to 60 years of Christ's death. Everything we know about how Islam began, who Muhammad was, what he did, what he said, how it began, is 200 to 300 years. Which is the more authoritative? Well, you can see very clearly that Christianity is more authoritative. As a comparison, if we had to depend on sources for Jesus and the emergence of Christianity comparable to those that Muslims have for Muhammad and the emergence of Islam, Jesus and Christianity would not begin to appear in any documental form until the 3rd century. Now, Tony, can you see why that's a problem?
And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know about the actual dates of the New Testament that we have, all the manuscripts, the whole Bible being written down before the year 100. And we talked in previous weeks about the thousands and thousands of manuscripts that we have that were spread out, that were impossible to go and collect in order to change them. So that whole thing, that whole belief just falls apart right there alone.
Okay, so this is a good comparison to start off this whole talk with. When we're looking at Christianity, no one doubts that Jesus lived. No one really doubts that he died. There is so much historical evidence for who he was, what he did, the fact that he died on the cross. The resurrection is really the only point that many historians are arguing today. But as far as how Christianity began and who this man was and where he lived and what he did, that's not in doubt. When you ask the same of Islam about Muhammad, we're talking about 200 to 300 years of what? Well, this is what the Muslims are, and this is their criticisms. Concerning these late dates, they're saying Islam as we know it did not exist in the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years. The Quran, they say, probably was not revealed to one man in 22 years, but likely evolved over a period of 50 to 100 years. Their conclusion, therefore, is that the history of Islam, at least from the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, hold on to that name, we're going to come back to that name, probably not today. We're going to probably more talk about that on the 7th week. But that name is hugely significant for everything we're talking about even today. But anyways, the history of Islam, at least from the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, that's 685 to 705 and before, is a later fabrication. Now, why? Well, look at their concerns. This is why. Everything we know about Muhammad was written down so long. Why did it take so long to write it down? Why did it take 200 years to write down the life of this man? If this is the greatest prophet in the history of mankind, why in the world did they wait 200 years to write it down? Were these people not literate? Now remember, they controlled Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo by 642 AD. By the time Abdul Malik comes to power, they controlled all the land from Spain, Andalusia, it's known at that time, from Spain in the west all the way to India in the east. So you cannot tell me from Spain to India that people could not read or write. So certainly they could read or write. So where did the 9th century biographers get their material from? More than that, can it be trusted if it is so late, from 200 to 300 years later? And should we not, as historians, go back to that period? Shouldn't we go back to the 7th century? Shouldn't we go back to where these events were taking place? Go back to the time this prophet Muhammad lived. This place, Mecca, existed. These mosques were facing. Shouldn't we do that? And that's exactly what we're going to do. And what we're going to ask them what they are finding. Now, let's just take a look at this map to understand what we're looking at. Take a look at the map. Look at the brown area. That's the period that they already controlled in 661 AD. They meaning the Arabs. You notice I'm using the word Arabs here, not Muslims. You'll see why in just a few minutes. They move out, and you can see, if you go look at the map, they move across North Africa all the way to Andalusia. That is modern-day Spain. The same time period, they move out to the east through Persia, and they control all the way over into India. So look at that land, that swath of land from India to Spain. They still control that land except for Spain and except for Jerusalem. They still, in Israel today, they still control all of that land and even more. Nonetheless, just in the 7th century, can you see what we're looking at? Now let's move on. And these are what we're going to be doing now. And what I'm going to be doing is taking the material from these men that you see and women that are on the screen there. These are the revisionist scholars. These are the ones who are at the top of the world and the top in their field doing this criticism. People like Dr. John Wansborough out of School of Oriental and African Studies. He wrote 2 books called Chronic Studies and Sectarian Milieu. And it is those 2 books that blew this right open in the last century. Hawting, from School of Oriental and African Studies, he was my professor in 1994, 1995. It was he that I got all this material from. It was because of what he was introducing me there in London while I was there at SOAS that I did my first debate in 1995. And some of the material that I'm going to be introducing today, I gave back there in 1995. We're now in 2017. So for 22 years, I've been asking these questions. This is not new material. This is not something that we're suddenly just plopped into our lap. Much of the material that the beginning part of this talk is from that time period. I knew it way back in 1995. We're still asking questions from that debate in 1995 that was against Dr. Jamal Badawi. We have not since then we have not heard any response from Dr. Jamal Badawi or from the Muslims on dealing with what we're going to introduce today. Probably the name, though, that's the most important is Dr. Patricia Corona. She was the place she was teaching was at Princeton University. I knew her when she was at Oxford University when she wrote her book Hagerism and also when she wrote her book Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. She reads and writes 15 languages. That's why she's so devastating. There's no one else that has her ability. And that's one reason why Muslims do not like her. They hate her. And that you will only hear vitriol against her whenever they refer to her. Dr. Andrew Rippon was also their was also the time when I was studying there. He was writing. He was from Calgary, at the University of Calgary. He takes a lot of this very difficult academic material and brings it down to people's layman's terminology. Dr. Robert Hoyland was at Oxford University. He reads and writes 18 languages. His book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It, is very informative to help us to know what was happening in the 7th century. Dr. Yehudo Nevo from Jerusalem University wrote Crossroads to Islam. He is the expert on the earliest inscriptions, the Arabic inscriptions that we're going to refer to. We have already last week. And then the German school, Dr. Luling, Dr. Gerd Quinn, Dr. von Bothmer, Dr. Oleg. These are the German scholars who have been working mostly on the manuscripts, and they're the ones who have done the best work on the earliest manuscripts, some of whom we referred to last week. But there are 3 new books and 1 documentary. Actually, there's 2 documentary which are paving the way. I'm going to go into them, and let's start with the first book. This is the first one, In the Shadow of the Sword, written by Dr. Tom Holland. Dr. Tom Holland has done us a great favor of taking much of this material and putting it into layman's terminology so we can understand it. You can see the UK and the US version there. But then he came out with a documentary called Islam, the Untold Story. This was filmed on Channel 4 television there in United Kingdom on August 28, 2012. And it tried to bring down all this material into one workable model, to try to use it and try to show what we're talking about. It's only 90 minutes long. That caused such a furore amongst the Muslim community that when they tried to refilm it, try to show it again on television in November of 2012, they could not because of the backlash that they were getting from Muslims. And yet what he was doing is, here's all the information I'm getting. Here's a what-if scenario in 90 minutes. If you have a chance, look at this documentary, Islam, the Untold Story from 2012. But since that time, Dan Gibson has probably done the best work. Now, who is Dan Gibson? Well, he was an archaeologist who lived in 3 countries, in Yemen, in Morocco, and most importantly, in Jordan. And from the time period of 1979 to 2004, for 25 years, he lived amongst the Beduins, he worked amongst them, he learned their languages, he understood Arabic, he tried to unpack the Quran. And what he wanted to do is he was looking at the Quran and he noticed that an awful lot of the Quran didn't make sense with the geographical locations that he was living in. That's why he then wrote Quranic Geography in 2011. And it's Quranic geography that we're going to look at. We're going to try to unpack. We're going to bring some material from. He came out with a documentary, The Sacred City, in 2016. And that was even more devastating because that actually took the material that he was coming across, that he was researching, and it put it into a documentary form. There were a lot of problems that Muslims found with that documentary. So he then wrote another book called Early Islamic Qiblas. That's the one, Tony, that you held up. That has just been out since May of this year. So it's only been out 4 to 5 months. It's very new, and it is devastating because he took all the criticisms that the Muslims were throwing at him and that other secular scholars were throwing at him, especially about the coordinates, and he showed the coordinates and how he came to those coordinates. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but let's first, before we get into that, let's look and see what the scholars are finding. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you their conclusions before we even show you how they came to their conclusions. And these are their conclusions. Now, if there is one slide you need to look at this slide, because this is the slide that really unpacks why is it we're even asking this question today, Tony. And the first one is that the first Arab inscription referencing Muhammad is not till 691 AD. Now, hold on a minute. I'm not using the word Muslim here. I'm saying Arab inscription. There were other references to Muhammad in other sources, but the first Arab reference to Muhammad is not till 691. The first reference to Muslims is not till the 690s. Before then, they were called Saracen, Hagarin, Ishmaelite, Maghreb, Mahajurun. What do these mean? The Saracen is a name that the Europeans gave. That's the name for the Arabs. Hagarin, they were in the line of Hagar, and that's why they call themselves Hagarin. Ishmaelite, they were in the line of Ishmael from Hagar. That's why they refer to themselves as Ishmaelites. Maghreb, this is where the area of the world that they came from the Maghreb. And they use the word Mahajurun, people of the Hijr, people of the Exodus, of the movement from one place to another, which they were. They were nomadic, so they were Muhajirun. These are the names they give themselves. Why did they not called themselves Muslims until 60 years after Muhammad's death. The first reference to the name Islam is not till 691, and that's found on the Dome of the Rock. And the first reference to Mecca, the city of Mecca, the place where Muhammad was born, is not till 741. That's the mid-8th century. That's over 100 years after Muhammad died. And the first biography of Muhammad, as I've already said, is within Islamic sources, is not till 833, written first down there by Ibn Hisham. So you can see the problem. Now, let's just go with the first problem. Then we're going to take a break after the first problem, and then we're going to come back to the second and third problem. But the first problem is geography. The first problem is geography. When you look at the Quran, and Dan Gibson notices, anybody who wants to read the Quran, you will see that there are lots of geographical references. Only 9 places are named in the Quran, but people are referred to over and over again, the people from Ad. 23 times the Quran refers to these people from Ad. This is the biblical Uz. You can look at the map and see where Ad is situated on the map there on the right. The people from Thamud, these are the Nabateans. 24 times in the Quran you will find that these people from Thamud are referred to. Now, what's interesting, it refers to this prophet in the Quran over and over again, but it doesn't give him a name. Only 4 times in the Quran do you find the name Muhammad. So it refers to this prophet over and over again, and it refers to the place of the prophet, the settlement of the prophet, but it does only once does it give a name to Mecca in the entire Quran, and that's in Surah 48, Ayah 24. So here you have these people that are having relationship with this prophet who has no name really. They're from Ad 23 times. They're from Thamud 24 times. That's a Nabatean. These are the Midianites. 7 times they're referred to, which means that they must be important. Yet all 3 of these civilizations, if you look at the map there, are in northern Arabia, nowhere near Mecca. They are 600 miles too far north. And that's the problem. Way too far north. What's more, when you do a comparison between the Quran and the Gospel of Luke, just look at the geographical locations. The Quran has 65 geographical locations. The Gospel of Luke has 110 geographical locations. The 9 references in the Quran are 600 miles too far north, all in the wrong places. There are 31 references in the Gospel of Luke. They're all named, and every one of them is in the right place, all of them where they belong. Now, we're going to stop and go for a break there. We're going to come back to this after the break. So I'll hand it back over to you, Tony. And once we do that, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and talk about the ramifications of what this means. Back to you, Tony.
This is definitely devastating information, as our viewers can hear. Again, a lot of the material that we're going to be presenting in here, the pictures, the GPS coordinates, all of that, you can find in early Islamic Qiblas. Again, the website is thesacredcity.ca, Canadian-based. Again, if you click on books, you can find early Islamic Qiblas for $60 plus shipping. You can find a PDF download for only $15. And if you scroll down that page, you can also find Mr. Gibson's book, Quranic Geography, not only the hard copy for $45 plus postage, or the download for $15 as well. Now, as you can hear, this is very important information for Christians to know about and for Muslims to be told about, because this is in complete contradiction to the historical Islamic worldview. I mean, we just see, according to tradition, how Muhammad went up to heaven and pleaded with Allah to bring down the number of prayers, quite similar to Abraham pleading with God about how many righteous people he would find in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? We see, according to tradition, Muhammad was the first community organizer, and it's devastating to get all of this actual historical information that refutes that. And even looking at the historical sources that we have, again, there's still a problem because they were very late. If you go to my Vimeo channel, vimeo.com/Tony Gurule, one video I have is the unveiling the facts of Sharia, and one of my slides in there, I have a bunch of early Islamic sources ranging from historians, jurists, hadith collectors, and their dates of death. And again, very late compared to the traditional story of Islam. So think about all that. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with more Colliding Worldviews and more information, devastating information from Dr. J. Smith.
Now in the palm of your hand is the updated ABN SAT app, so you can now watch all the programs, shows, and channels in different languages. You can download the app in the App Store related to your device. Once downloaded, you will see 6 different categories within the ABN SAT app. The first category being the English category, which includes 18 different channels. The Arabic category includes 31 channels. The Worship category has 5 channels. The Discipleship category includes 5 channels as well. For more information, please call the numbers on your screen or visit our website at trinitychannel.com.
Islam and the News will now be live on satellites every Friday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific and 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your Islamic news source with Tony Gurule will now be broadcasting to North America on Galaxy 19 and to Australia and New Zealand on Optus D2. Tune in on satellites to view this program in addition to our digital platforms. For more information, call the number on your screen.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to ABN's Trinity Channel for another episode of Colliding Worldviews. Again, we are in part 3 of 7 of the special end-of-the-year 7-part series, the Historical Critique series with Dr. J. Smith. It's a blessing to have him back once again for this vital topic of why are there 4 Islamic Qiblas? Again, 4 directions of prayer. He already gave some almost conclusion-type evidence there before the break, but now we're going to get deeper into it and see why these scholars are coming to these conclusions. And again, it is devastating. Dr. Smith, please share some more devastating information with us.
Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head on back down to the slide back, and we'll go bring those slides up again. So, Tony, go ahead and take it, and we'll go back and get started with those slides again.
Very important to, again, be looking at this stuff. And again, this is polemics. It's not apologetics. We're not defending the Christian faith. We are critiquing the Islamic faith. This supposed idea that, oh, you know, back then people couldn't read and write enough to get this stuff down sooner. Well, when Muslims moved into North Africa and Alexandria, they burned books in libraries of information that didn't agree with the Islamic worldview. So definitely there were people around who could read and write, but we see a continued expansion of Islam. And again, supposed one turning of a Qibla, but again, we have 4. So let's go and look at that information now.
Right. Well, let's take a look then at problem number 2. We looked at problem number 1 before the break, and that was the difficulty with the geography. It's just the stories of Ad, Thamud, and Midian. Just too many of them to make sense for a man that was living way down in Mecca, unless he had a helicopter and was helicoptering 600 miles up and 600 miles back down, 1,200 miles in a day. No, that's a real problem. But the much more devastating problem is Mecca itself. According to the Quran, it's only found once in Surah 48, Ayah 24. We have it on the screen there. But it doesn't say much about it other than it's in a valley. That's all it says. Nothing more. If it's such a great city, why doesn't the Quran talk more about it? When we look at the significance of Mecca, we know it's the center of Islam. It's the first sanctuary, according to the mankind, was that at Mecca or possibly Mecca. We don't know, but Surah 396. It is the mother of settlements in Surah 692 and 42:5. Now, we don't know if this is referring to Mecca. We just know that where the Prophet lives is the mother of settlements. We know that possibly, according to what Muslims tell us, Mecca is where Adam and Eve were thrown down to in Surah 724. Again, we don't know if this is Mecca. We just know they were thrown down to earth. According to Surah 21, Ayah 51 to 71, though Mecca is not in the Quran written, it is assumed by Muslims that that's where Abraham lived in 1900 BC, and that Mecca is where Muhammad was born and lived until 622 when he moved up to Medina for the Hijrah. And it became the center of the Qibla, according to Surah 2, Ayah 145 to 149. Again, it's not Mecca. It's not the word Mecca. It's just that to the holy place, the Qibla was then redirected. And that was, most Muslim scholars believe that would have been 624. So the Qibla, the direction of prayer that Tony talked about at the very beginning of this program, that would have been canonized. That would have been solidified in 624 AD. Hold on to that, because we'll be coming back to that as we move forward. Yet the only reference to Mecca in the Quran as a place is Surah 48, Ayah 24. Why, if it is so important? What we do know, if we look at the traditions, this place where the prophet lived, the place of the prophet is in a valley and had a parallel valley. It has a stream going through it. It was outside. There were ruins, possibly even a pillar of salt that he passed in the morning and the evening when he came back. It had fields, according to Al-Buhari. It has trees, according to Tirmidhi. It had grass, according to Al-Buhari. It had fruit, according to Al-Buhari. It had clay, loam, according to Al-Tabari. It had olive trees. This we see in Surah 6, Ayah 141, and Surah 16 and Surah 80. And it had mountains overlooking the Kaaba, according to Ibn Ishaq and Al-Buhari. So you have, look at this, it looks like a very fertile place. Yet you look at Mecca, it is not in a valley, it has none of these listed above, because it is too arid and it is too dry. And it certainly doesn't have olive trees, because olive trees only grow around the Mediterranean. And that's why we don't see olive trees anywhere in the Arab world. Can you see then why these are a problem? And this is why many people are looking. Now let's take a look at the maps. This is a Byzantine map of the trade route in the 7th century. What's missing? You can see what's missing. Mecca is not there. It should be just down below Yathrib. Yathrib is the archaic name for what is today Medina. Just down and to the left of Yathrib. Here's another map. You can see Medina is there, a 7th century Arab trading route, but Mecca is missing. Here is another map. 6th century map. So this is the century before the time of Muhammad. Mecca is not there. Another 7th century map. Mecca is missing. Just does not exist. Here's another 7th century map. Mecca is still missing. Another 7th century map, and it's non-existent. Can you see? This is getting redundant. We're giving you map after map after map. And you can see Mecca is non-existent. Now, let's look at this map a little bit longer, because this is the one that Dr. Patricia Krone looked at when she brought up her problems. This is what today's Muslims believe, or the Orientalists, not just the Muslims, the Orientalists believe Mecca, or you might say the Middle East, was like at the time of the 7th century. And this is where the trade route theory came into existence. You had the trade route theory, which supported the notion that the trade came from China and India. You can see India there on the right side of the map, and you can see all the mountains, the Hindu Kush and also the Himalaya mountains up to the north. There's no way the trade could go that route, so it had to go across the Arabian Sea up into the Persian Gulf. And you can see the blue, the Persian Gulf there, where the trade route went. But then in the 5th and 6th century, you had the Sassanids, which is in the Iran, that part right in the middle of your map, and the Byzantines over up in Turkey, the Byzantine area. That was the Byzantines. They were warring with each other for 200 years. The 5th, 6th century, they were warring. That shut down the trade going up the Persian Gulf. So they had to redirect the trade down over to the southern part of Arabia, down to Aden. I don't know if you can see that right at the bottom of the map. Can you see the word Aden there? I wish I had a pointer here so I could point to it. But that's where the trade went to. It went from the Indian west coast there across the Arabian Sea over to Aden. And then it followed that green line. If you look at the green line, that's the trade route that goes up to Najran, Sana, up to Taif. And then from Taif, it goes down to Mecca. Take a look. There's a jog. It makes it goes down to the left, and then it comes back up to the right to get to Yathrib, Khaybar, Tabuk, and then up to Gaza in the north. And that is the trade route theory that has always been used by Orientalists and even by Muslims today. Patricia Krone looked at this map and she says, hold on a minute. You've got a problem with that. Now, I don't know if any of you have picked up the problem. My 10-year-old son picked this up 10 years ago, and he saw immediately, why would they go across land all the way from Aden all the way up to Gaza when they have a waterway going up the left coast there, the Red Sea? Why didn't they just go up the Red Sea? They're already on board ship. But Dr. Patricia Krone found out that if you go 50 miles by land, it's the same price as going 1,250 miles by sea, and that's 1,250 miles, the Red Sea. It would have been the same price to go right up by boat, the Red Sea, as only 50 miles by land. Land is very expensive because you've got to have camels, you have to feed them, you have to protect them, you have to water them, you have to house them. And more than that, you have to buy them. Whereas with boats, you're already on boats coming across the Arabian Sea. Why don't you stay on boats? It's so much cheaper. That's why we ship goods all over the world, even today in the 21st century, by boat. What's more, she decided to find out if her theory was correct. So she went back to the trading documents. Now remember, she reads and writes 15 languages. She went back to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, up until the 8th century, and she found that all the trade was maritime, and it all had to do with Andalusia over here on the eastern coast of Africa. What is Eritrea today? They were the ones that were responsible for the trade. Their names are all through the trading documents over on the right, over there in India. Now, the earliest reference, therefore, she could find for Mecca, since it was not on the map, it was not on the trade route, the earliest reference she could find for Mecca was the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius, Continua to Byzantia Arabica, which is written in 741. She couldn't find any reference until this date. I gave this out way back in 22 years ago, and we asked, has anybody found a date, any reference to Mecca earlier than that date? And we still haven't found any Muslims or anybody that can find a reference to Mecca on any documentation earlier than 741. Muhammad died in 632. Can you see the problem? This is over 100 years later. The first map that shows Mecca on it is not till 900 AD. Can you see why this is so devastating? Now let's look at modern Mecca today. There you can see the Abraj al-Bayt towers. That's the Royal Clock Tower there in Mecca. They are now built. They have built that. That's the 4th highest building in the world's largest clock face. It's going to replace the Big Ben that you see pictured there on the lower left. This is what they're planning to do. They're going to build 60 to 70 of these high-rise buildings. This is a future plan. One of those 4 are going to be chosen. They are cementing everything up. And why do you think they're cementing everything up? Because they're trying to destroy the evidence. When you build large buildings like that, large, huge, humongous, 4th highest in the world, you have to dig deep. You have to go down and build foundations. And whenever you build foundations, the archaeologists come in their droves, because as you dig down, you're pulling up all kinds of artifacts that the archaeologists want to look at. Every major city, whether it's Amman or in Jordan, whether it's Jerusalem, whether it's Damascus in Syria, whenever you build large buildings, you have to have archaeologists on hand to look at all the material that you're pulling up, so that you can reproduce the history of the city. Yet to date, no ruins or artifacts have been found in any of these digging sites, in any of these building sites. They're covering it up. Even they're covering up the Prophet's birth home. They're covering up the Prophet's wife's house, Khadija's wife. Muslims are upset that they're covering up. Why do you think they're covering up? I would suggest they're covering up because Mecca has no history. That's why they're covering up. And of course, they're building all these buildings over top. So you will never be able to find any artifacts. There is no artifacts to be found. If you don't have Mecca until 741, if you don't have it even on any map, then what are you going to do with the Qibla? And this is now where we're really going to talk about today. This is really where the mud hits the fan, Tony. This is where we're going to really unpack, because it is this problem that we are now going to look at that Muslims don't know what to deal with. If you don't have Mecca anytime earlier, then of course you don't have the Qibla. You don't have the direction of prayer, because every Muslim knows today they are to face the Qibla. They are to face Mecca. The Qibla is towards Mecca. Now, how do they find the Qibla? Well, you find it many different ways. You can, if you go into a mosque, the lower left, the left-hand picture, you'll see a mihrab. That's usually these niches they have in the walls. That's always pointing towards Mecca. In my hotel room, you can see that arrow there. That's a picture I took of the Qibla on the wall of my hotel. There in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, so I knew where the Qibla was. Today, most people just use an app on the phone. Most Muslims will just use an app, and it shows you exactly where Mecca is, so they know where to pray. We do know that in Surah 2, ayah 143 to 150, that the direction of the Qibla is changed. And that was, most Muslim scholars believe that was around 624 AD. But it doesn't say where to. It says, we do know it was changed from Jerusalem, but to where, it doesn't give a name. Again, it's missing. Mecca, the word itself, is missing. But do we have support for this change? Well, we do. Dr. Creswell and Dr. Fehervari, back in 1905, so we're talking over 100 years ago, they were digging in this area, and they were there before this was all shut down, before this was made off limits. Over 100 years ago, you could go into these areas, and they went into Iraq, they went into Wasit, which is in Iraq today, into Kufa, which is in Iraq today, not too far away from Baghdad. And they dug down to the original floor plans of both the Wasit Mosque that is there and the Kufa Mosque that is there. And they were able to find the earliest Qiblas. And they noted this back in 1905, that the Qiblas for both the Wasit Mosque and the Kufa Mosque were facing west, but they should have been facing south. When they went outside of Cairo to the garrison town called Fustat, they dug down to the original floor plans for the mosque there in Fustat, and they found that that the Qibla for those ruins are facing east. Let's take a look at a map, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The Wasit and the Kufa Mosque are facing west, but they thought that they were possibly facing Jerusalem. Fustat was facing east. And the reason they thought they were facing Jerusalem is because of a well-known reference from Jacob of Edessa, written in 705 in the early 8th century. And he says, the Maghreb, that's the Arabs, that's where they come from, Maghreb. So from all this, it is clear that it is not to the south that the Jews and the Maghreb here in the regions of Syria pray, but towards Jerusalem or the Kaaba, the patriarchal places of their races. So even back in 705, this Jacob of Edessa was writing, suggesting that these Arabs were facing Jerusalem. But they were wrong. And I thought it was so when I did my debate back in 1995. And I was hammered by the Muslims, and I said, no, you're wrong, Mr. Smith. You don't know what you're talking about. It's not Jerusalem. Jerusalem is 3 to 5 degrees off. Had I paid a little more attention, I would have understood why it was off by 3 to 5 degrees. I didn't have Dan Gibson at that time. Dan Gibson came to my help. And Dan is a great scholar. This man has done what scholars should do. He's gone and lived amongst the people. He's lived there for 25 years. He has done what any scholar should do. He has learned the languages, spent time amongst them. For 25 years, his whole career has been spent looking at and trying to find out where these Qiblas are. Came up with this in Sacred City in May of 2060, and then early Islamic Qiblas. There you can see a picture of it that you held up earlier, Tony, done in just May of this year. He noted the Qiblas, and he didn't use Google Maps like a lot of Muslims believe. He only used Google Maps in his documentary to show us on Google Maps so we could do the same thing. But the problem with Google Maps, it's a flat Earth. It doesn't take into consideration the curvature of the Earth. So he used ArchNet. ArchNet is the most sophisticated form of using coordinates today, put out by MIT there in the United States. And he used their material. He used their expertise. Now, let's look at his findings. Now, everything we're going to see now for the next number of slides, anything to do with the mosques and the Qiblas, is all Dan Gibson's work. And I pulled it from the Sacred City and the earliest Islamic Qiblas. So therefore, anybody can go and look at this for themselves. If you don't believe what we're going to show you, then for heaven's sakes, go and see what Dan has come up with and buy his book and buy his PDF. Listen, this man has put so much time and energy into working on this. We need to give him the credit for where credit is due. Now let's look and see what he found. The first mosque. This is the mosque of the two Qiblas. It's known also as the Qiblatain Mosque in Medina. Now this is not his picture. This is taken, of course, from above. He could not go to Medina. He was not able to because he is not a Muslim. Only Muslims are allowed to go there, and that's why these are pictures from friends of his. Interestingly, it was always known as the Mosque of Two Qiblas. Qiblatain means that in Arabic, but nobody knew why, because it's always facing Mecca. The green arrow that you can see in their picture shows that it's facing Mecca until it was renovated in 1987. And in 1987, they found another wall extending to the left, and there they found another Qibla, and it's facing almost directly north, where the red arrow is going. When you pull back, you will see where that second Qibla is facing. It's facing straight north. Many thought in 1987 that this was Jerusalem. We now know that it's not Jerusalem, and you'll see why as we move on, that this was Petra that it was facing. Why do we know that? Well, let's look at the second great mosque of Guangzhou. This is the mosque that's in Canton in China. Look at the date, 627. Now, what Gibson has done, he's put these four circles at the bottom, blue circles. Each one of them shows exactly where the Petran Qibla was, where the Meccan would be, and where Jerusalem is. So where this mosque is, he's giving you red arrows where the actual mosque is facing, where Petra is, where Mecca is, and where Jerusalem is, and he's showing a degree of error with each one. Degree of error in this case for Petra is 2.81 degrees. The degree of error, if it's facing Jerusalem, is 4.86, double the degree of error than Petra. So the degree of error for Mecca would be 7.11, almost triple the error. Well, almost triple the error for what Petra. So obviously, the closest city for this Qibla would be Petra. But take a look. We're talking about Guangzhou in China. That's thousands of miles away. This is the first Qibla. Note that this is the first example of the first Qibla with a mosque which is built facing Petra that we know of. If you look and you see, now we're using Google Maps. This is not ArchNet. This is just to show you what we're talking about. Follow the red line, and you will see that that red line intersects Petra perfectly and not Mecca. It's not going towards Mecca at all. It's going towards Petra. When we get to India, now we're in India. Here is the Sharman Juma Masjid, built in 629. Look at it. It's built in before Muhammad was dead, like the one in Guangzhou. These are building long before even Muhammad was dead, which means these are, as we're going to see next week, these are Nabatean mosques. These are Nabatean that have been taken over by the Muslims, and that's why later on they then become mosques. But these are the earliest ones. These are the Nabatean temples facing Petra, because that was the center of the Nabatean kingdom. We're going to talk more about that later on when we come to conclusions. But nonetheless, Petra, degree of error is 0.26. It's obvious that this Indian mosque is facing Petra, not Jerusalem and not Mecca. When we get to Jami Hama al-Kabir Mosque in Syria, now we're in Syria, 637. Now we're after Muhammad's death. Look at the degree of error here. It's 0.61. Jerusalem, it's 7.17. If we could go back to that, you will see it. Mecca, the degree of error is 25. So it's obviously that the Jami Hama al-Kabir Mosque is facing Petra and no other. When you get to the Fustat Mosque outside of Egypt, this is the mosque that Creswell and Fehravadi were talking about, and they just said, isn't it curious that it's not facing Mecca? Now, we cannot go to the original mosque, so we don't know where the original Qibla was, but we can see where the Qibla has been referred to, and because it's rebuilt in 826. And the description of the original floor plan showed that the Qibla is to the east and later towards the south, noted by Creswell and Fehravadi. When we get to the Dome of the Rock, again, it doesn't have any Qibla, the Dome of the Rock. But look at the entire citadel where it's seated. And you can see that it is facing, as we're going to see later on, because it goes intersects right through the Al-Aqsa, where the red arrow goes, the entire citadel, including the Dome of the Rock, built in 690, and we're going to find Al-Aqsa that's built in 709. There we do see a Qibla, and it has the same facing as the Al-Aqsa. It's facing Petra. The Humayma Mosque in Jordan in 699. Again, the closest it has faced degree of error is Petra. The closest city is Petra. When we get to the Amman Mosque in Jordan in 701, now we're moving into the 8th century. The closest city for the Qibla, again, is Petra. When we get to the Grand Mosque in Sana'a in Yemen, built 705, the closest city for the Qibla is Petra. When you get to the Qibla al-Minya Mosque, now we're getting to Israel, 706. Remember, 706 now, we're in the 8th century. The closest city for the Qibla is Petra. So, notice how up to 706, all the Qiblas are facing Petra. Every one of the Qiblas is facing Petra. As we bring it in, I'm using Google Map. I'm not using ArchNet here because you cannot see on ArchNet visually what we're showing you here on Google Maps. Can you now see? They're all facing Petra. Why Petra? And why not Mecca? Well, note, every Qibla from Medina, China, India, Syria, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Yemen, and Israel again, all of them are facing Petra up until 706. And the Qibla was supposedly canonized and formalized in 624. So you're talking about a good almost 60 to 70 years later. They're all facing Petra. That's the first Qibla. I want to show you how exact they are from as far away as Guangzhou. These are the lines coming in. And can you see, except for two of them, they all fall within 45 miles of the dotted line. That's the 45 mile. Can you see how exact these are? Thousands of miles away, and yet that's how accurate they are. This will become important later. Now, we finally get to a second Qibla. In 706, the Wasat Great Mosque shows a second Qibla somewhere in between. This is the Great Mosque in Wasat. We're not sure what this is, what's going on here. Here's what's interesting, however. We're going to see quite a few of these that are showing exactly the same. Great. We do know what this is, but I'm not going to do it. We're not going to talk about it in this episode. Let's continue on. So that's the second Qibla. But then back In 708, another was built towards Petra. And then we get to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem that we talked about earlier with the Dome of the Rock. There you can see it on the right. It is facing almost directly towards Petra. So is the entire citadel in Jerusalem facing towards Petra, including the Dome of the Rock. We're coming back to Syria. Jami al-Umayyi al-Kabir Damascus Mosque in Syria, 709. Now we're in the 8th century, moving on to the 8th century. It's between again. The Qibla al-Masjar, Jericho Mosque in Israel. It's back to Petra again. Now we're in 714. Still, not one mosque is facing Mecca. The Anjar Mosque in Lebanon, 714. It's back to Petra. The Mosque of Umar Bosra in Syria, 721. It's in between. It's not Petra. I'm sorry, it's not Mecca. It's somewhere in between. The Hayr al-Gharbi, Syria, in 726. Now we've gone over 100 years after the canon of the Qibla, and still it's not facing Mecca. Not until 727. That's 103 years later. Finally, we get a mosque facing Mecca, and it's all the way over in Banbor in Pakistan. Look at the date, 727. This is Qibla number 3. Qibla number 1 is Petra. Qibla number 2 is in between. Qibla number 3 is Mecca. This is the first example of any mosque facing Mecca. Back in 728, you have the Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi Mosque in Syria. It's facing in between again. Then we get the Amman Jordan Mosque. Now take a look at this one here. You can see two mosques there. Can you see the lower mosque? That's the earlier mosque that we already looked at from Jordan. That's the Amman Citadel Mosque. It was built in 701. It's facing Petra. That's where the red line goes. Then in 730, another mosque was built above and behind it and above it, and it's facing Mecca. So something has happened between 701 and 730 to change the direction of prayer, to change the Qibla. Here we go to Qibla number 4. Then we get, and these are the mosques in northern Africa, Tunisia. These are the mosques that are facing parallel. They're not facing in between. They're not facing Petra. They're not facing Mecca. They are parallel lines. Here is Qibla number 4. We'll get back to why that's significant. Back to Baalbek Mosque in Lebanon in 740. Look at, we're back to in between again. Here's an Amusta Mosque in Amman in Jordan, 743. Back to Mecca. I'm sorry, Petra again. So now we're coming back to Petra as late as 743. The Haran Mosque in Turkey, way up in Turkey. It's facing in between. Qasr Ukaidir Kufa Mosque in Iraq. It's facing Mecca. And then we get to North Africa again. We're getting Tunisia, the Ribat Fortress. It's facing parallel like all the ones in North Africa. The Sahiramda Mosque in Borhar Amman. Here we go, 771. We're in the late 8th century, and it's facing Petra. The Sumail Omani Mosque in Oman, possibly 771 again. It's facing Petra. The Raqqa Mosque in Syria in 772. It's facing in between. The Bibi Samarkand Uzbekistan Mosque in 773. The closest city is between Petra and Jerusalem. Now we get the Cordoba Mosque in Spain. Like the other North African mosque in Spain also agrees with the North African mosque. It's facing parallel. And the Jamia Uqba Ibn Nafi Kirwan Mosque in Tunisia, it's facing parallel. Now let's take a look at what we've just found. Note the 4 Qiblas. Petra for the up to 706. Then we get an in-between mosque, followed by confusion for the next 100 years. Of those next 100 years, 17 are facing Petra, 8 are between, 10 face Mecca, and 6 are parallel. The Qibla was not finalized towards Mecca until 876, almost 250 years too late. So here we go. Most of the Qiblas face Petra for the 1st century, up until 706. They're almost all, in fact, they all face up until 706. But for the 1st century, almost all of them face Petra. Some of them, however, face in between. And take a look where the in between is. It's almost halfway between Petra and Mecca. Something's going on here. And the fact that they're so exact that they're all facing this one point. What's going on here? We're going to come back to that. Meccan Qiblas don't begin to appear until 727. This is over 100 years after it was supposedly canonized, and long after the Petran Qiblas. And then we get the parallel Qiblas. Yet there are Qiblas where face parallel. They're not facing Mecca, they're not facing Petra, but they're facing a line that parallels Petra to Mecca. So, which Qibla is the most accurate? Well, the Petran Qiblas are 2.9 degrees of accuracy. The in-between ones are 0.98 degrees of accuracy. The parallel Qiblas are 3.5 degrees of accuracy. And the Meccan are right at the end, the 4.78. Muslims are saying, oh, this is just because Muslims didn't know how to do their directions before the Meccans really got into it, and they were the most accurate. If you look at these, when you look at these accuracies, you will see that it was the Meccans who were the worst. They had the longest one. They had the most difficult. I mean, they had the ones that were the most inaccurate. So you've got a problem here. Why Petra? What's going on here? Well, take a look and you will see why. It's the center of trade, not only for the Nabateans, it was also for the Umayyads. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look quickly, and I'm going to bring it back and give it back over to you because we need to go and unpack this. Now, we can either do it now or we can wait for 7 weeks from now because we're almost finished with our 1 hour. I'll give it back to you, Tony, and I'll let you decide.
Let's go ahead and go another 5 minutes if we need to, possibly 10. But I know we've moved fast, but we do want to get in the rest of this information, Dr. Smith. So let's go and just take an extra 5 minutes or so.
Let's get the information in because this, and then we're going to give the conclusions at a later date. So Petra's importance. It is a city of tombs and temples. If you take a look at it, take a look and you will see it has a valley, it has a parallel valley. That answers what Ibn Ishaq is saying, Bukhari and them are saying about the place where the Prophet lived was in a valley and had a parallel valley. It has a stream, according to Al-Bukhari. It's the very thing Al-Bukhari is looking for, you can find in Petra. It would be near Lot's pillar. It has fields. It has tree, grass, fruit, loam. The very thing that these traditions are talking about where this prophet comes from is what you find in Petra. It even has olive trees and it has mountains. So Petra has all of the items listed above from the Quran and the Islamic traditions. Thus, could Petra be the place they're referring to? That's the question we're asking. Petra was where Ad, Thamud, and Midian are located. All the geographical locations that are found in the Quran fit Petra. But Petra is 600 miles too far north. Why is this significant? Well, let's review what we've just noticed so far. Nothing is known about Muhammad until the late 7th century. His book, the Quran, and its manuscript don't appear until the 8th century. His city, Mecca, isn't referred to until mid-8th century. His biography, the Sirah, and his sayings, the Hadith, don't appear until the early and late 9th century. Thus, much of what we know of Muhammad is written down hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away. It looks like he is nothing more than a later redaction, possibly begun by Abdul Malik. So, what really happened? We're going to leave you hanging there. And Tony, I don't want to answer that question yet, because I know this everybody wants this to be answered right now. We're going to hold on to that. We're going to stop there because there's more information that we need to bring in the next few weeks. And then in the 7th week on December 18th, we're going to come back to this and we're going to show you what's going on. But we'll give you a little bit of a kernel to help you out. And that is that it has to do with politics. It has everything to do with politics. But which politics and who's involved and what happened and how did it all happen? Well, you're going to have to wait for another 4 weeks. Because when we come back in 4 weeks on December 18th, we're not going to even show you why this is significant. We're going to show you who is it that makes it significant and what this person does to make it significant. And it has something that you can see even today. And it's going to be exciting. But I don't want to let the cat out of the bag yet. So this is a good way to leave them going, leave the watchers and the hearers to wait a bit. Because when we come back, you're going to see that these Qiblas make all the sense in the world if you just look and see what was happening historically, if you look and see what is happening politically. So we'll leave it there. I'm sorry that we're not going to answer that question today, but we wanted to introduce the material. It's an awful lot of material we've thrown at you. Go and look at this video again and get it under your belt so that when you come back on December the 18th, ready to hear the answer, ready to hear the conclusions, then you will see why we're asking these questions.
Excellent. Dr. Smith, it's been a blessing to have you here. Friends, if you didn't see parts 1 and 2 of the series, go and watch them. You have a week to do it because we're not going to be waiting until December 18th to meet again. We're actually, again, meeting every single Monday all the way to December 18th. Next Monday is going to be Dr. Daniel Janosic. We're going to be asking and answering what is the Andalusian problem. We talked about Al-Andalus on that map, which is the Islamic term for Spain. But in the meantime, check out thesacredcity.ca. Again, that's Dan Gibson's website. You can get the PDF download of this book for just $15. You can get the hardback for $60. You can get Quranic geography, which goes into how Mecca does not line up archaeologically and I guess topography and again, archaeological evidence of actual history compared to what we're finding archaeologically. Now, friends, as a review, if you look at mosques in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, China, India, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Cyprus, Algeria, Israel, Jordan, Iran, Lebanon, Bahrain, Pakistan, Tunisia, Turkey, Oman, Uzbekistan, and Spain. I mean, as he presented here, all the way up until 706, which is 87 AH for our Islamic friends out there, not facing Mecca. Huge problem when you compare this to the historical story
Tony,
about
it's
Islam.
worse than that. Actually, Tony, it's 727 they're not facing Mecca. So we're talking beyond 706. 706 is where they all face Petra, but not one of them faces Mecca until 727. That's the most devastating thing. And no Muslim has been able to answer that. For most Muslims who are watching it, this will be the first time they've heard this.
And the 706 is when we start to get that in between. And
that's correct.
Still a problem. So, yeah, I mean,
it's a problem.
And
We're
the first one,
on the 18th.
Go ahead again.
Now,
sorry.
Tony, we're going to answer all of this on the 18th. And we're also going to bring in what we talked about last week. We're going to now show you why all the manuscripts don't begin to appear until the 8th century as well. Look at the dates. The earliest we have is 705. It all fits to a piece. But it has an awful lot to do with politics. That's all I'm going to say. And we need to look and see who were the great empires of this period and what were the rivalries that were happening and what were the rebellions that were going on. When you see the history as we know it, this is the history we do know about, you're going to see that all of this archaeology, even the manuscript evidence, the documentary evidence, the maps, the whole trade route, all of this will make sense. And that's why this material is going to completely change the narrative, that classical narrative that we started out with. We're not going to be it won't happen immediately. This will take time for an awful lot of Muslims to digest. There's going to be an awful lot of anger that comes out from this material. That's going to take time for them to work it through, to try to come up with some type of rebuttals. They're going to have to come up with rebuttals, but we're not just going to take the rebuttals from the 9th century anymore. We're not going to use those rebuttals anymore. You can't just keep on quoting Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and Ibn Dawud and Ibn Tirmidhi. You've now got to show us historical rebuttals. Give us names, dates, places, and events from the 7th and 8th century that help and give you any reference for your classical account. Otherwise, stop using the classical account. And what we're confronting today is that account. Did Muhammad even live in Mecca? Was there a Mecca? Did that city even exist? And if not, then what did exist? And why are all these Qiblas facing not Mecca, but Petra? And why are some of them not even facing those two cities? Why are some in between? And why are the others parallel? Why are there 4 Qiblas and not one? And we'll end with that.
A huge problem. And I know, Dr. Smith, that part of the rebuttal is going to be skepticism. And again, people saying, oh, yeah, but those aren't accurate coordinates and all that stuff. Dan Gibson says in his book here, he does use Google Maps for some pictures, but as far as the GPS coordinates, he got as many as he could actually on the ground using a GPS, either himself or a relative or a friend. They're getting GPS coordinates. And again, he is using Earth Data's ASTER. Let me give you some details about that. This is the Japanese Advanced Thermal Emission and Reflection Radiometer, or ASTER. And this is on page 120 of Early Islamic Qiblas, if you get this book. It says here, the ASTER data has been validated by NASA, METI, Japan's Earth Remote Sensing Data Analysis Center, and the U.S. Geological Survey, and the U.S. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So these are the coordinates that he is using for these mosques. Again, it completely destroys the classical story about Islam and how it came about. We do have to leave you with that. Dr. Smith, thank you for being with us for weeks 1 through 3. Friends, next Monday, we're going to be here with Dr. Daniel Janasic talking about the Andalusian problem. So In the meantime, share this video with people, everyone out there. Again, Muslims are going to look at this and they're going to say, hey, I mean, there are going to be Muslims say, well, this is all false. I'm not going to be a Muslim anymore. They're going to leave Islam. And like I said, that's great. That makes this world a better place, but just a better place to go to hell from. We are all going to die and stand before God, and Muslims need the gospel. So if they leave Islam because it's false, that's great. But they need to come to Christianity because it's true, and because Jesus, the true Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was found in the New Testament, he is who they need to look to, repent, turn from their sins, and put their trust in him, not in their self-righteousness or in their self-righteous works or deeds or whatever else. So please take this information, share it when you need to, but mainly be informed yourself, inform other Christians, and again, use this as more information you can share with people when necessary when you're out there sharing the gospel with people. And all people includes all Muslims. So God bless you, and we will see you next Monday for another episode, part 4 of the 7-part end of the year special series, the Historical Critique series with Dr. J. Smith, and again next Monday with Dr. Daniel Janasic. So we will see you soon.